Okay, Joseph Frank, 1885, 1967. So Joseph Frank was an Austrian-born architect, you see, born on July 15th, artist and designer who adopted Swedish citizenship in the latter half of his life. Together with Oskar Schnard, he created the Vienna School of Architecture and its concept of modern houses, housing and interiors. Um, this work, this word is associated with him because he advocated what might be called accidentism, in the sense that he advocated a form of designing that seemed to be unplanned. And I'm very sympathetic with this because I think there is too much willfulness and too much dogma and too much, obstinacy in designing, and to design in such a way as if it is unplanned, it means you are advocating spontaneity and naturalness. And I think we need more spontaneity and more naturalness, and even chance encounters, so to speak. So he was I found these words, they are not mine, apostle and apostate Joseph Frank's modernist vision. More than an architect and designer, Joseph Frank was an intellectual who built ideas. His Humanist Manifesto, Accidentism, denounced the banality of orthodox modernism and called for a new pluralism in design. I called him a modern anti-modernist, or modernism, and a modern anti-modernist. And an interesting man, a little bit difficult to be seduced by his work because it's so, in a way, homely and sweet sometimes. And although I think there was some kind of an oblique heroism in his work. Um, anyway, um, he also had social concerns, and as other architects during his time. But he had a feminine side, I would say. The fact that he did many textile works, ornamental work. He was very interested about the interior of the building. Joseph Frank. Perhaps a wise man, perhaps having a wisdom which some of the stars of the modern movement didn't have. Perhaps. Joseph Frank, born in Vienna. Some drawings, artworks, and textiles, and I will also end the presentation with drawings, artworks, and textiles. These are very important for him. Now, can you imagine that we are dealing here with a modern architect? Look there, Joseph Frank against design. Uh, if you do something like this now, at least in some schools of architecture, you'll be considered mad. But Joseph Frank was an important architect, and he understood the value of ornamentation, of playfulness, of enjoying through colors, something that, again, we forgot to do. And why? I think we impoverished architecture tremendously by not allowing our innocence or childlike, dispositions to manifest themselves. It's sad. Really, we reduced architecture to white walls and right angles, and there are no sinuous lines, there are no colors, there is no vegetation, there are no fruits, there are no birds on the branches of the trees. It is as if, I don't know, when are we going to banish the sterility of a certain understanding, very dogmatic, of modern architecture. I think it was a tremendous loss. I mean, how much pleasure can you have only drawing white walls? Now, Tedesco apartment, I employ a lot of images and texts from misfit architects, and I like the misfit architect. He was a misfit, and I think we need more misfits in the world, and not just in architecture. Well, sorry for the, the picture is not great, but you can get a feeling a little bit. So no two items have obvious similarities. The shape and pattern of each item is about the furnitures, but not just the furniture, the furnishings is suited to what it is and how it is used. But if this is functionalism, then it includes an emotional component. Each thing is how we expect it to be. The chairs in the foreground are Frank's redesign of the Biedermeier chair. The cushions have a printed design. The ceramic heater is almost vernacular. The vitrine against the wall is of no known style. Importantly, the position of all the things inside the room is arbitrary, apart from the writing desk close to the window for daylight. This is the first and last time Frank used a wall covering to mediate between the space and the things in it. From now on, all internal walls would be white and the things inside the space would supply the interest. But the things inside the space would be very colorful and rich in shape and so on. Some furnitures that he did, maybe this is not great, but anyway, an early work. Like many others at the turn of the century, Frank admired the English arts and crafts movement, and his early furniture shows a unity of construction and decoration. A unity we should also try not to forget. Some have likened the richness of Frank's fabric designs with the wallpaper designs of William Morris, but Frank never designed wallpaper. His fabrics were extensions of the occupants and not additions to the architecture. Frank had no sympathy for secessionists such as Olbrich and Hoffman, who were trying to contrive yet another style, new style, but was in full alignment with Adolf Loss's objections to the house's Gesamtkunstwerk, a total work of art. In 1910, Frank was 25, but already on a collision course with what modernism was to become. In Italy, the futurists were ailing for the wholesale rejection of history, but Frank never thought that necessary. He didn't mind redesigning a Biedermeier chair or a Windsor chair or a leatherback chair, and saw no reason why everything had to be completely new. The futurist legacy was to legitimize the rejection of history. It is true that some things, such as the provision of housing, require some new thinking, as the old models were no longer working. But the futurists encouraged a degenerate kind of modernism, of newness for the sake of it. Before that had even come to pass, Frank was trying to find the good in the past and bring it into the present. This does not make him a pre-modern postmodernist. Exhibition design of the East Asian Museum in Cologne, 1912. I couldn't find pictures. The summer house for Hugo Bunzel Ortmann in Austria. This is an interesting house. I even employed it on one of my invitations because it is traditional in a way, but also has a peculiar kind of modernity. Not so much seen from here, perhaps, but it has a certain idiosyncrasies which I like. Funny this little thing here, you are not going to see, I mean, imagine Villa Savoie with something like this near it. That would be, I'm sure Le Corbusier would have died the second time if he saw that. The house shell, 1914. This one also is interesting and a little has something of Adolf Loos, but a little less harsh in a way, a little bit more impure. The symmetry is betrayed. It's not a perfect symmetry. Look at these openings here, and but it's an imperfect symmetry, which I like in nature. It's not a perfect symmetry. This is the back towards the garden, dramatically different from what we saw in the main facade. Frank also admired the informal planning of the English house and preferred rambling plans without symmetries and axes. I like these two words, informal and rambling, because they lacked a controlling geometry. His rooms were open to having furniture arranging them in arbitrary ways. Arbitrariness could be positive, because it brings a certain relaxation in the design, and I think we need more of that relaxation. Workers' housing from 1921. Frank thought a living room as being pretentious in worker housing of this size, meaning a small size, and so provided kitchen, sitting room in line with the Austrian vernacular tradition of the Wohnküche. And I would say that we should reconsider ourselves the concept of a living room. I mean, did traditional houses in Romania, rural houses, did they have a living room? What about the other rooms? They are not for living. So it's kind of strange. We only call one room as being living or for living. But what about the others? You live in all of them, don't you? So it is an interesting provocation here, that he thought that a living room is pretentious for, in this case, for the worker housing. But I think we should reflect a little bit on this, something we never question. When we design the plan of an apartment or a house, we always have the so-called living room. But maybe other arrangements are possible, and I think they are. So to make a house without a living room, but you unite a sitting area with or dining area with the kitchen, and you can even enter into the house, I would say, through the kitchen. It's okay. I know this will not be accepted in the schools of architecture, but I think it's okay. I remember when I used to go to Saliște near Sibiu to my grandmother. I entered from the pridvor, from the veranda, directly into the kitchen, and then into another room. It was okay. Anyway, he opened this store with this Oscar Vlach. The store promoted the vision of the home for the common man, and indeed he worked for the common man. And the anti-aesthetic it promoted placed it in opposition to the notions of the machine and the championing of machine-produced objects. He was also against, Le Corbusier's idea that the house is a machine à habiter, a machine for living. He was totally against it. So here we see something of this store that he opened with that man. Municipal housing. There are very interesting municipal housings. I mean, housing complexes in Vienna. Part of the Red Vienna, which was for a good number of years a communistic part of the ancient, the former capital of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And very interesting architects built some very interesting blocks of flats. So this one from 1921 to 1984 Frank's plans allow for the maximum number of dual aspect apartments with their advantages for daylighting and ventilation and their benefits for the prevention of tuberculosis, though this is forgotten. Rooms generally led off the central living space in an arrangement that allowed apartments of many different sizes to be configured. I think these apartment buildings still look, and they were built for poor people, as you can see. But today, I imagine that they are not very inexpensive apartments, or well, if they are for sale. But this social preoccupation of Joseph Frank, I think, is a noble one, and he was not the only one who worked like this. And you see, it was huge. So, from what I gathered here, looking at the plan, there were room after room after room, and you just entered from one room to another room. There were no corridors within. Very interesting. Why not? It even looks good, I would say, even by today's standards. Winarski Hof, Vienna, also another important block of flats where he worked with Adolf Loos, Joseph Hoffmann, Peter Behrens, some important architects here. I hope I have other images with this. Here, I think is only this one. Yeah, this was a large housing project to which the architects worked separately on the various apartment buildings and communal facilities. In 1927, he was invited by Miss van der Rohe to contribute with a building in the Weissenhof in Stuttgart, the Weissenhof colony, where many very important architects were invited. So he was invited too. Here is Frank's building. You are going to see it. Of the original 21 buildings, it's one of the 11 remaining. Again, there is the tidy ground floor with minimal circulation leading to various corners for activities. The living room has direct access to the garden and the bedrooms to the roof terrace. Theo van Doesburg criticized Frank for his femininely appointed interiors. Indeed, I think he was if I can call him so, a feminine architect, but I would say that is a quality. Another critic likened them to a brothel. Clearly, the new modern movement didn't like pattern and had no time for sentimentality or even personality. The feminization of textiles seems to have come from Gropius, who was dismayed by the proeminence of Heinrich van der Velde's Weimar, and the Bauhaus made the textile course obligatory for all women students. So the building looks quite modern towards the outside, and it was part of that Weissenhof colony where other modern buildings were one near the other. So two apartments, coupled together. In this case, is a generous living room, but also, connected with the kitchen and so on. he loved textiles, and you can see them here. The modern person who is increasingly more exhausted by his job requires a domicile cozier and more comfortable than those of the past. He has to obtain relaxation in more concentrated ways in a much shorter time. Therefore, the domicile has to be the absolute opposite of the workplace. This applies not only to the sitting and residing areas, but to every visible object. Ornament and variety create peace and eliminate the pathos of the purely functional. That's what he wrote. Frank had a different conception of what it was to be modern. Another apartment building from 1928, 1929. Let's recall this was the time when the Villa Savoie was built. I would say an interesting block of flats here, nicely refurbished, renovated by the Viennese. This reminds me a little bit of Karl Marxhof, the huge building in Vienna, in Red Vienna, in what was called Red Vienna. 1931, 1932, another municipal housing, quite large. A very impressive Vienna, Red Vienna, that communistic Vienna, which attracted many intellectuals and artists and architects. It was a breath of fresh air, I would say, within Vienna. And these social concerns you can witness even today. It's something refreshing, particularly when you consider that Vienna was an imperial city, was the capital of the Austro-Hungarian empire, and yet it accommodated functions that, from various points of view, could be named communistic. Another municipal housing, 1931, 1932, for Frank, modernism continued to have the moral imperative of housing people. These apartments and the next ones had larger rooms and larger courtyards than the 1924 municipal housing that he built, as well as having a lower side coverage. Frank did not think apartment size was the dominant criteria in housing. Frank saw the apartment block as a compromise and never gave up on the house. The best living space does not consist of the number or size of the rooms, but the quality of life that they enable. This is contrary to what Jean Nouvel thought, because he said, Jean Nouvel, that a nice apartment is a big apartment. But it seems for Frank, the quality of life within the apartment was more important and not necessarily the size. You can have a small house or a small apartment where the quality of life could be high. Now, a single villa from about the same time, 1929, 1930, his villa, I don't know very well how to pronounce, Beer, is modernist on the outside and could be mistaken for a building by André Lussat, another misfit architect and exhibitor at the Werksbungs, the exhibition in Stuttgart. While it manifests itself in different ways, Frank's attitude towards the interior is very similar to Eileen Gray's at E1027, the famous villa he built for her lover, a Romanian architect. In that it is relaxed and haptic, perhaps sensual. The space with a circular window in this villa is not a room. It has no name. It's just a corner off the first floor landing and is a pleasant place to be. That's it at the top, on the top left on this plan. And here is, sorry for the resolution, is not great, but maybe you can read a little bit here the drawing. The Romanian architect that I was referring to, that Eileen Gray built her famous, is Jean Badovic. Jean Badovic, who promoted also Le Corbusier, and they were even friends. And there is even a picture, Le Corbusier with his wife and Jean Badovic around the table. Very interesting character, Jean Badovic, born in Bucharest. Much younger than Eileen Gray, but they were lovers for a good number of years. And there is even a movie made rather recently about their love life, love affair, and Le Corbusier appears too. You can check out this film, this movie. You can find it, to download it and watch it. But it's a rather commercial, Hollywood movie, but or sponsored by Hollywood. So anyway, Eileen Gray and Jean Badovic and Le Corbusier. It's strange, that round window, and he uses this motif sometimes. But anyway, you see, he liked sofas, he liked textiles, and he liked comfort, but not an arrogant comfort, I would say. Now, this house almost looks like a small school back facade anyway. The interior, though, is interesting. It has a certain complexity. Even if the walls are white, Josef Frank. Well, there is some green here, isn't it? Some of these furnishings are recent, but you can see the space, its majesty, the space. A large building. In a 1930 speech to members of the German Werkbund, Frank questioned the radical modernist drive towards stylization, arguing that it was not singularity but by diversity that defined modern culture. When he said the new architecture should be allowed to grow from pluralism and not from rigid principles, I suspect, the one who wrote this text, he was referring to Le Corbusier's 5 points, because the main living areas of this villa are at ground level, as they are in all his houses. The sitting area projecting into the garden is no summer conservatory. Radiators beneath the seats show Frank intended this as a place to enjoy the outdoors and the garden, whatever the season. Frank said modernism is what gives us complete freedom, and this is not some conceptual middle ground between principles and utility, but a different way of thinking about what being modern is meant to be, not what it could be represented by. The Messian blurring of inside and outside, and the Corbusian rooftop unconnected to the garden, Both make spaces neither totally inside nor totally outside. If someone really wants to enjoy being out in the garden, then they take a chair and go sit there. If it's too cold, then this sitting area at Villa is the next best place. Inside is inside and outside is outside. People have the freedom to choose and do not have some homogeneous space forced upon them. I think this is what Frank meant. And this text makes me remember that there is a poet, he's still alive, born in Sibiu, but now in the United States, and quite successful as a poet in the United States, who wrote a book called The Disappearance of the Outside. And it's true that somehow, in a strange way, in modernity, we wanted to bring the outside in and the inside out. But maybe Frank has an interesting point of view here. Maybe this is not that promise of freedom that is highly beneficial. Maybe we can reconsider the relationship between the inside and outside. For example, in the Muzeul Satului or old buildings, they didn't have this idea to bring the outside in and the inside out. The house was the inside par excellence, and the outside was the outside par excellence, and it was fine. Anyway, I venture now on a complex issue, but I think we could reflect on this, the relationship between the inside and the outside. Now, this is the exhibition house at Werkbund in Stuttgart. We already saw some images. Housing exhibitions are a good idea, the one who wrote this text, and I agree. And we should have more of those. This person wrote, I don't know why we don't have them anymore. That is in the present. Although in Japan, they still do it. We hear a lot about the 21 houses in the Weissenhof exhibition in Stuttgart, but little of the 70 houses of the Werkbund exhibition in Vienna, which I visited with 2 or 3 years with students from Bucharest and not only. He built there the Frank's house was number 12. We are going to see the house is divided into 3 functional zones, each split down the middle by circulation. The dual aspect living room therefore has cross ventilation in one direction and cross traffic in the other, forming 2 defined yet connected zones for dining and sitting. A well-organized house should be planned like a town, that's what he said, with streets and paths leading to places free of traffic where relaxation is possible. Well, even Palladio thought in the same way that, you know, a city should be like a villa, like a big villa, and the villa should be like a small city. All furniture and furnishings and the matching fabric for curtains and daybed were by the company Haus and Garten Frank and Oskar Vlach that they founded in 1925. This can still be seen. This Werkbund colony, like in Stuttgart, but more modest, but very important architects exhibited here. Adolf Loos, Gerrit Rietveld, Josef Frank, and Hans Hartung, not Hans Hartung is an artist, Hugo Herring, and a few others. Is an interesting place to go once you are in Vienna. It's a little bit off Vienna, but once you go to past Schönbrunn, not too far away is this colony, the Werkbund in Vienna. And I forgot what the number, I think number 12 was his house. And these are the plans. Modest houses, this, you know, these are not, they were meant, you know, kind of like, yeah, very modest little houses. Josef Frank. Now, the avant-gardist or the rebellious one would say that this is too domestic and too bourgeois. And in a way, it is true. But maybe even the avant-gardist and the rebellious one would enjoy being in such a space. Maybe. But you see the presence of the fabrics, the textile works that he was so fond of. By now, Frank's interest in how people are going to live in the house was fully developed, along with his proposal of a bright and relaxed comfort in which soft furnishings were important. Curtains and upholstery fabric were important not because they were art for the people, as the constructivists had maintained, but simply because they made living more pleasant. To argue for an architecture based on pluralism and not on rigid principles was revolutionary at the time, and it is revolutionary now. Had his call for a conceptual middle ground between he did in 1930, we might have spared the violent conceptual lurch from the extremities of a supposed modernism, and after 30 years to a supposed postmodernism. Frank viewed the Bauhaus with suspicion and questioned if it was even functional to have a design aesthetic concerned more with principles than utility. Frank believed that the modern movement was going astray, that it was being commandeered by extremists determined to limit and define modernism in their own misguided terms. And now 5 villas that he built in Sweden because he left in 1930s because of the rise to power of the fascists. He left, he was a Jew, and he left with his wife to Sweden. And now you see five houses that he built in Sweden. Frank's wife was Swedish, and they spent much time in Sweden in the late 1920s. Of the 5 villas Frank designed there, House Clesson is the best documented. All feature asymmetrical living rooms at ground level with bedrooms and terraces above. So this is a little villa he built in Sweden. Another one. The third one, Villa Seth. And this is the one the short text was mentioning. There are at least 2 unbuilt house proposals for Salzburg, at least a dozen for Vienna, and 1 each for Munich, Tel Aviv, and Los Angeles. Here is one of the 3 versions of the Los Angeles one. I mean, the plan. Interesting plan. One floor house, but not a small house. Lots of rooms. "1933, the year after the Verbundssiedlung, that's the exhibition in Vienna, Frank was to emigrate to Sweden as he was Jewish. He had a job waiting for him designing furniture and textiles for the Svensk 10 company. Since 1921, the owner, Astrid Eriksson, had followed Frank's work through journals. She promoted the company's design in national and international exhibitions and obtained influential commissions such as for Swedish embassies. Around the world, Frank's work came to be understood as the important new style Swedish modern. Here they are together, the owner of that company with Josef Frank in Sweden. Although Frank continued to design houses and schemes until at least the mid-50s, there is no built work after the 1930s. This is partially due to there being few opportunities to build during the war years in Sweden, and also because he and his wife were to again relocate, this time to the US for the period 1939-1947, where he could continue to do what he was now best known for. Textiles and furniture, and this is what he's best known for. Frank's fabric patterns were always free. The freer the pattern, the better, he said, and often danced with colorful flowers, fruits, birds, mountains, and waterways, but not always. Such as such as coral appear more early in the 50s than the early 30s. Anyway, and now you'll see again some of these textiles full of color, and he enjoyed doing them. What can you do? What can you say? They might be sentimental for us today, but I think there is something positive in this. And this imaginative innocence and this narrative which connects with nature, with plants, with animals, with butterflies. Why not? Are we too cynical for do something like this? I think we are, of course. Furniture and furnishings for the Swedish pavilion in 1939 at the New York World's Fair. On the left, well, we'll see the image is an image of the interior of the Swedish pavilion, and already apparent is the looseness and lightness that was to become part of Scandinavian style in the 1950s. The room in the other image contains Frank's Brazil sofa from 1930 and his 881 cabinet from 1952. This was to become how we live. I mean, there is a level of domesticity here which could irritate, the avant-gardist, but on the other hand, there is also a level of complexity and richness, even if the walls are indeed modern and white. But what modern architect would place something like this on a white wall? Not many, I would say. Not even the most nostalgic ones. It didn't go well for Frank in the country that had recently, I'm talking about the United States, accepted Mies van der Rohe and Gropius versions of modernism. On the left below, we'll go there, is a New York slum clearance proposal from 1942, and on the right is a 1950 proposal for a town for 2,000 families. Sometime between these two projects, Frank must have realized he was fighting a losing game, even though his rebellion against austere stylistic interpretations of modernism didn't continue in built form. He maintained his conviction modernism had a moral purpose to promote human comfort. Now, yes, these renderings seem to have a certain level of naivete, but the colors, and I understand, if you compare this with the works of Mies and Le Corbusier, they appear to be, naive, but look at the plan above, you know, there is a certain joy here, you know, and yes, a certain innocence. Even in this watercolor, he kept doing watercolors. This is his proposal for a town. His late watercolors were not so much proposals, but statements showing that joy and being modern were not incompatible. The houses below are mostly from either the 50 series of 13 house designs for Dagmar Grill or the 1953 series of 6 house designs for the Dagmar Grill. Complete designs with plans, etc. They are all attempts to solve the problem of the sterility of post-war modern architecture. And yeah, I mean, I'm sure he irritated the pioneers of the modern movement and even their children, so to speak, because this kind of illustrative architecture is this kind of renderings would be considered, I'm sure, now as they were considered then, naive, um, you know, sentimentalist, and so on. But maybe it's refreshing actually to also see a modern architect, because he was a modern architect, also indulge in this kind of images or renderings of architecture, explorations of possible architectures. I know this would be considered immature, I know, but I think he was a mature architect who was in opposition to what the mainstream modern architecture advocated and built. Yeah, some look indeed strange, you know, like this, but they're just suggestive for possible, aesthetical configurations. Nothing, nothing more than this. Strangely, at this very moment, if you open Sucker Punch daily, you will see architectures that are considered, cutting edge, done with digital means today, using colors like Josef Frank used, and even patterns and forms, and plus the great return of the ornament and of weaving. One of the last diploma presentations at SciArc this year, 1 month ago, was exactly about this, weaving, so and textile work. So I think Josef Frank could come back as being related to a present that is different from the hardcore modernism that we are accustomed to. I suggest to you to visit Sucker Punch Daily, and you'll see there very, in a way, disturbing works done in the best architecture schools of the world with digital means, but sometimes with something relating to what we look at now here. At least chromatically, if not more. And I would end by asking, what are we to lose if we try to bring back to architecture a certain level of innocence, and even this so-called amateurish relationship to architecture? I think it will clean up some of our inhibitions, because I think we are inhibited. The dogmas of hardcore modernism is inhibiting. So someone like Josef Frank, I think, could loosen up our state of mind and our disposition towards doing architecture, an architecture which is regaining somehow some of its lost innocence. Okay, and I'll end by showing some watercolors that he did, which the person who wrote about this says they show these watercolors, a person just doing what he pleases. Well, I don't know. I mean, they are watercolors. They are not maybe impressive artistically, but yeah, I guess he enjoyed himself doing them. Okay, so let's wish him happy birthday. And with this, I end the presentation today. And I thank you for being here.